I want to talk about holding Bitcoin versus holding fiat, because there's an interesting thing that happens on YouTube. When I use the word spending Bitcoin in the title, it goes down, like the performance goes down. And I love, I don't know, I love mixing the like behind the scenes of like what it's like to talk on YouTube with the like talking about Bitcoin. But sometimes I feel like I lean too far to each side and it's like comes across jumbled, but you know what? So far it's working. And like, here's the thing, when holding all Bitcoin means you are spending Bitcoin. But a lot of people don't even like the concept of like holding all Bitcoin hasn't been talked about enough, which is why I go into my whole thing of like OG Bitcoiners were great at talking about Bitcoin, but they were bad at talking about personal finance. And so this concept of like holding all Bitcoin, that's inherent before the conversation about spending Bitcoin. Like, because so all of these comments that come back in of like, oh, well, why would I spend Bitcoin when I can spend fiat? Yes, I understand. And yes, and I've talked to like hundreds and thousands of people about this. Like not hundreds of thousands, but literally thousands. I've talked to literally thousands of people about this, both online and in person. Yes, we are in a dual currency world. There are dollars and there is Bitcoin. And then if you live somewhere else, there's an even lower fiat than dollars. That is the structure of what's happening in the world. That is what's happening in the world. So this concept in the last video, the initial title was spending Bitcoin makes sense, which is true. That is true. Spending Bitcoin does make sense when Bitcoin is your money, when you hold full Bitcoin. If you're still holding some dollars, some Bitcoin, then totally, then you're constantly balancing which one is which. But what happens is a lot of people that have been stacking for a lot of years, your savings has already majority Bitcoin. Your savings, your long-term savings, your future money is already in Bitcoin. And then your short-term money is mostly all in dollars, right? What's beginning to happen is there's now this middle period. Like say you pay your insurance once every 6 months, or say you owe your property taxes twice a year, right? That medium term thing. Do you hold that savings in Bitcoin or hold it in dollars? Or you hold it in a high yield savings account, hoping to get some return on the dollars while the dollar is devaluing compared to its purchasing power? You know, like that middle range is what people are actively seeking solutions on. And Bitcoin is in that solution bucket. Bitcoin is a potential in that solution bucket that lots of people already use in that bucket for holding medium term money. Okay, and then you keep just shortening that as you get more and more comfortable with like each thing, right? It's not an overnight thing, but that's where that's coming from. And so I just think it's a really interesting thing on YouTube to say, like if I use a title that says spending Bitcoin, it doesn't get a lot of traffic. But if I do a video that's like holding Bitcoin versus holding fiat, then it's like everyone's on the same page and like all the talking points are flowing and we get it, because it's all the stuff that the podcast and everything's been talking about forever, right? Like, but holding is a short-term thing, a medium-term thing, and a long-term thing. So all spending Bitcoin is talking about holding Bitcoin on a short-term basis. That honestly feels good to just get that out and articulate it like that, because then what I really want to talk about is how to then overcome the volatility, how to overcome the taxes, how to overcome the XYZ on the short-term framing. But we need to get past all these comments that are like, why, or what? That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make sense. We have to get past that. We need to get past that so we can start talking about solutions. So spending Bitcoin means holding Bitcoin on a short-term basis. And the reason why you hold Bitcoin over fiat is because Bitcoin is a better money, a better currency than fiat. That is true across all of the buckets on all time frames. So we're trying to expand, something I'm actively trying to do is trying to actively expand the amount of people talking about the short-term time frames, because Bitcoin has already won long-term time frame. It's already won the long-term. And there's also hundreds of people that already talk about that. There's already hundreds of channels that are already talking about that. So there's a subset of people, a growing subset of people that are interested in moving Bitcoin deeper into their personal finances on all timelines. Here's another thing. It also doesn't mean spending down your stack. It doesn't mean spending down your stack. Like, all it means is using Bitcoin in the short-term bucket instead of dollars in the short-term bucket as the currency. It doesn't mean take your long-term and spend it down as if it's a short-term. Like, that's the buckets are not the problem. Personal finance advice is not the problem. The problem is that dollars are functionally broken. That's the problem. Dollars are functionally broken. And in order for the kind of like Bitcoin to realize its truest potential and help the most amount of people, it needs to also be a short-term solution, and actively is a short-term solution for a lot of people. There's just kind of like this weird chicken or the egg thing that was created out of lots and lots of years of random weird Bitcoin personal finance advice being repeated and repeated and repeated. So a lot of this is just unwinding that and unwinding that. And then if you're new here, like, you actually don't have a lot of that mental baggage. Like, that's why a lot of new people, they're like, oh, like, that's sweet, how do I spend it? Like, because they're just interested, like, there's no split between savings and spending. Like, it just is. Like, you do both with your money. You do both with your money. So then you're like, oh, Bitcoin's better than dollars. Then immediately they are like, oh, like, okay, how do I spend it then? Because everyone already knows how to save. Like, people know how to save. Maybe they don't do it well, or maybe they have a hard time with kind of their personal finance habits of savings, and that's a good question. But how do you save? You move it into an account and leave it alone. You move it into a wallet and you leave it alone. Like, people know how to do that. So that's why they're asking, how do I spend? So that's the whole video, the whole concept is so funny to like new people showing up, because they're just already at that stage. But it's like kind of this middle range of Bitcoiner who like just got beat down that like, oh, the monetary evolution is going to happen in this exact right order, and it's like, I can't use it in my short-term bucket until others use it in their short-term bucket, or until some magical thinking thing happens in the future and everyone gets tapped on the shoulder like, oh, now's the day or whatever. And I was that too, like, that happened to me too. But that's not the case. That's not how it works. It's different for every single person. And the tools are getting better and better every single day for people to use Bitcoin across long-term savings, medium-term savings, short-term spending, short-term holding, but I can't use the word spending because, then traffic doesn't come to the video. So that's where all that's coming from. And I love talking about how new people like already get that part, and then it's the middle people that we're unwinding it for. And then the OG Bitcoiners also already got that part too, but their voices were like drowned out by kind of this like middle tier of influencer that took over for a while. So thankfully the ice is thawing on all of that. People realize Bitcoin is better than fiat money, and let's get through these comments, like drop all of the comments so that we can get them all out around like Bitcoin not working in a short-term bucket, so that we can start talking about the solutions of Bitcoin working in the short-term bucket. That was helpful. Watch the next one.